Hello everyone and welcome to the TradCast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. Today is episode number 16 and we'll be hunting off-grid public land bucks with outdoor author Todd Mead. This is going to be a great show. Let's jump right into it. Alright everyone, welcome back to another episode of the TradCast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. Today is episode number 16, and I've got another great guest interview on the show today. In a few moments, I'm going to break over to an interview I recently had with Todd Mead, who is a very accomplished state land hunter and outdoor writer. And today on the show, I'm going to be discussing with Todd about his hunting strategies, his tactics for how he hunts state land, and how he locates these mature bucks on difficult to hunt state properties. And I'm hoping that everybody learns a thing or two today from Todd that they can apply to their own hunting strategies, which will help them be more successful in the future. Now, I also wanted to give you guys just a couple of brief updates. As you can probably tell here if you're watching the YouTube feed, most of our snow now has gone. We've had several warm days this past week, which took the majority of our snow. I'm anticipating that I've still got some snow up in the woods here. I'm actually heading up to my hunting property because, first of all, I want to go to, I've got several trail cameras that have been out in the woods now all winter that I haven't really been to because the snow has been so deep, and there hasn't been a lot of deer activity through there anyways, because most of the deer on my property go to a winter yarding area during the winter time. But now that spring is here and our snow is really starting to go, and in the woods, I'm anticipating any snow that's left will be gone by next weekend. So I'm expecting the deer to start breaking up from those winter yards and start coming back to my hunting properties. So I want to go in today, check all of my trail cameras, make sure I've got updated batteries in those and updated cards, so that I continue to get pictures of these deer as the spring progresses. And I also want to go in today and check several of my food plots. Now, I've got probably, between my two hunting properties, I've got like 12 food plots that I plant. And the vast majority of those I'm going to put into clover. And so I need to do some frost seeding. So I want to go up today, check my food plots, so that I can make an educated determination of when I want to do my frost seeding. Now, the conditions that I'm going to be looking for here on my own food plots is, first of all, I want all of the snow to be gone, and I also want that spring snow melt, all that watershed and water runoff to also be, soaked into the ground before I do my frost seeding. Because what happens is, if you don't do that, then that watershed will take your seed and basically, get it off of your food plot, which is pretty much wasting all of your seed. So I'm going to go up today, check my trail cameras, check my food plots, and I'm anticipating I'm still probably going to be a week to maybe even 2 weeks away from doing my frost seeding here in northern New York. But today I'll be able to make that determination by going into my woods and seeing what the current conditions are and making my game plan from there. I also wanted to give you guys another brief reminder. If you want to watch or if you want to listen to the podcast in an audio-only version, the two ways to do that are on Podomatic.com or on iTunes. And all you have to do is simply search the TradCast, and we should pop up, and you can listen to us there. And just one last update for everybody. Today is April 11th, and actually last night I started shooting my Simmons Tiger Shark broadheads, which I'm going to be shooting exclusively pretty much from now on up until turkey season. Because this turkey season here, starting May 1st in New York, I have a goal to try to take a turkey, a longbeard, with my longbow. And I just think that it's very important to get a lot of practice in with your broadhead setup before you start hunting. So I've got roughly 20 days left before our spring turkey season opens, and for the next 20 days I plan on pretty much exclusively shooting my broadheads, my broadhead arrows, so that I know without any shadow of a doubt exactly the flight characteristics of those broadheads before I start hunting. Because I have noticed there's just a slight difference between my field tip setup and my broadhead setup. It's not much, but it's enough of a difference that it can affect your shots and affect your accuracy in those critical hunting situations. So I'm going to be practicing the next 20 days exclusively with my broadhead setup. And now, without any further ado, let's jump right into this week's interview with Todd Mead. All right, everyone. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got a special guest on the line tonight. I'm interviewing Todd Mead, pro staff member for the Adirondack Bowhunters. And tonight, Todd is going to be giving us some tactics and some strategies for off-grid public land buck hunting. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thanks for having me, Chad. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I know I reached out to you a few weeks ago about doing this podcast, and I'm glad that you accepted the invitation.
Yeah, I don't know if I can offer your listeners too much, but I'll give it a whirl. I have about, between 30 and 35 years of public hunting experience. And I've hunted private land, but the majority of my hunting is done on public land. In that I live in New York, and I live in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. The vast majority of my hunting is done in New York. I also travel all the way across the country, and I do that every year, and all of that is done on public land too. So hopefully I can help you guys out.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to chat with you this evening here on the show. Now, for anybody who's not familiar, Todd is a very accomplished hunter. He's taken several trophy caliber bucks, like he mentioned, in the Adirondack Mountains and in various places of the country hunting state land. Now, Todd, for the people out there listening who may not be familiar, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into hunting, and kind of what you're currently doing in the hunting industry?
Sure. When I was little, my father always hunted. When he grew up, nobody in his family hunted, so it was kind of new to him. He had to learn on his own. And I have an older brother, and when we were growing up, my brother's 4 years older, and he introduced both of us to hunting. So my brother really enjoyed hunting, and I didn't like it at all. I had an experience. We went coon hunting, and my father shot a coon out of the tree, and I went home and I cried, probably for a half hour to my mother. I told her I would never hunt in my life, and I didn't want anything to do with it. So I decided I wanted to be a fisherman. So I spent hours and hours in a creek behind my house, and I became quite a good fisherman, and that's all I wanted to do. Well, as time went by, my father kept coming home with all these deer, and I would wait in the living room window, just wait for him to come home to see whatever he brought home. And the more times he came home with bucks, I decided, man, I'd like to give that a try. So he decided to bring me, and I went and I sat with him, and he brought me to places where I could see deer. And I think that's really important for people growing up. You need to bring your kids where they can see deer so that holds their interest. And then he let me shoot 2 does with a BB gun, which probably wasn't the smartest thing in the world to do, but it wasn't like I was going to hurt them. So that was my introduction to deer hunting. And from there, I basically became obsessed. And I pretty much live for deer hunting now, deer hunting and archery. And along the way, I got a lot of experience, and my major in college was English. I always wanted to write a novel, but then one of my good buddies, he owns the website adkhunter.com, which is the most visited website for Adirondack deer hunting. he said to me, he says, why don't you write a book? You have a lot of experience in that area. And he said, I think people can draw a lot from what you would write. So I said, oh, what the heck? Even though I wanted to write a novel, I knew that writing a narrative about my hunting adventures would be much easier. So I decided to write the book. I wrote the first book, which is A Lifetime of Big Woods Hunting Memories, and it chronicles my hunting from the very beginning up until current day. When that book hit the market, I decided if it did well, then I would write another book. So the first show that I went to was the Yankee Sportsman's Classic in Vermont, and in 2 days I made all my money back on the book. So I decided to write another book, and that book went well too. And they're both pretty much, the books have stories. It's not really a how-to type book or anything. And currently I'm writing a different type of book. It's a do-it-yourself public land hunting book, and I'm hoping for a little bit different audience with that book. So we'll see what happens when I get it done.
Awesome. Now, that's a book that you're currently in the process of writing, correct?
Yep, that's correct. I'm probably more than halfway done with it right now.
Okay, cool. Could you share with us a little bit about what that book's going to entail?
Yeah. Actually, I kind of tried to follow the format of the first two books. And I'll give an example for people who aren't familiar with the other books. I take a deer that we killed, and then the whole chapter is about how we killed that deer. So this book that I'm currently writing is probably more for like Midwest hunting, people that are unfamiliar with hunting public land. And I give examples of deer that we killed and what I learned in the process of it, and I try to share that with people so it will help them if they ever decide that they want to go and give public hunting a try in the Midwest someplace.
Awesome. Sounds like it's going to be a very informative book.
Yeah, I tried to do things that people maybe wouldn't think about, like the cost, how you can split it with different people as long as you have the right people, lodging, the little things to look for when you're trying to find a piece of public land to hunt, areas that you want to look in different states, and just stuff like that.
Very nice. Now, Todd, the main reason why I wanted to have you as a guest on the show tonight is to, further break down, this public land hunting and how a guy can be more successful. And my next question for you was, I wanted to have you kind of touch a little bit on what your tactics are for postseason scouting or this spring scouting. I mean, we're in April now. A lot of guys are out there doing their spring scouting or their postseason scouting. I wanted to get your thoughts and your tactics for how you break down a piece of state land, or any property for that matter. But what scouting techniques do you utilize?
Yeah, I'll start with right after the season because of course that's where the scouting starts. And when the season's done, usually a week or two after the season, I usually like to go in the woods and I'll wander around because I don't have to worry about actually hunting, because when I hunt, 100% of my concentration goes into hunting, and I don't pay attention to a lot of like littler things. So I'll go out a week or two after the season, and in the area that I'm from, there's usually a lot of snow on the ground, and I'll just see what I can find by following tracks, seeing where they lead me, seeing if deer are bedding in certain areas, seeing how they're getting to and from different areas. And so I kind of do that. And then as we move toward, I don't do much in the middle toward the winter just because it's we get too much snow, it's too cold, and it's really not worth it because a lot of the deer in the mountains migrate into areas where people feed them and stuff like that, so it really wouldn't do any good. And then right now, this time of year in the spring, I usually walk around the woods, but I don't go in places that I normally hunt. I'll go to areas that I find on a map that is public land, and it's places that I've thought about hunting, but I'll go in there so I can check it out and see if it's actually worth it for me to go back there. Because I already have all the spots that I have, So I don't feel I'm going to gain a lot by going back there. When I go into these new places, I like to kill bigger deer, but it hasn't always been that way. So what I'll do is I'll try to find if there's a lot of rubs in there, scrapes, what there is for runways, swamps, mountains, because there's a lot of mountains in the area that I live in. And I'll look for any type of feed, because up here deer are mainly browsers. There's really no mass crops. In the southern Adirondacks, there's a lot of oak trees, but the further north you go, there's really no oak trees, and you'll have beech trees, but they don't produce a lot of nuts. So for the most part, deer just browse. So I'll look around to see if I can find places where deer have browsed in the past, and that's kind of what I do in the spring. It's not like right now I'm seeing a lot of stuff on social media where people are finding sheds, and they're finding like all these old scrapes, and they're looking at this and that. But in the mountains here, you really don't have that same type of I guess you'd call it luxury to scout in those ways.
Yeah, just to add on that, I mean, I've only found one shed in my entire life. And for anybody who doesn't know, I actually live in the foothills of the Adirondacks myself also, so I'm very familiar with what Todd is describing here in terms of, our environment for hunting. And I've only found one shed my entire life, and it was actually Christmas Eve back, like 15 years ago, and it was on the edge of a field. So I can certainly relate to you when you say that it's difficult to find sheds. And like you said, you see all these pictures on Facebook and stuff, or where guys are finding 10, 15, 20 sheds a day, and just doesn't seem to be that easy up here.
Yeah, I would actually love to shed hunt sometime, but when you're in areas where you're not going to find them, or it's very, very hard to find them just because there's so few deer, you're almost wasting your time. But on the opposite end of that, people always ask me if I found sheds before, and I have a small tote full of sheds that we found between my father and I, and we have some really good bucks in there, and we found both sides of them, which is even more unique since we're in big mountains. And we have never found a shed in the springtime. We found them all during hunting season. And for the most part, my dad has found the vast majority of them. And I tell him that maybe he would shoot more deer if he wasn't looking on the ground all the time.
Yeah.
So.
Now, one question that came into mind when you were talking about your scouting techniques, Todd. Now, you mentioned you'll go out into the woods a few weeks after season, before the dead of winter sets in, and you'll walk around the woods and follow runways and stuff. Now, when you find an area that you think would be a good hunting spot, are you taking the time to set up a tree stand location at that point, or are you doing anything in that regard, or are you waiting for a different time of year?
No, I don't do anything like that, because the main reason is because where I hunt in the mountains, things can change from week to week. So usually what I find is pretty much what I'm going to find in the end of the season. At least that's the way that I look at it. Because with the snow, everything changes. I have an area that I used to hunt all the time, and before the snow flew, it was a totally different place than after the snow hit the ground. So I just mentally note it. And then if I go back in there and in the early season that sign's still there, then I know it's probably good throughout the season. But I don't really get that in depth with it.
Okay, very nice. Now, Todd, one more quick question on this. Could you give us a breakdown on like what percentage of time you're hunting from a stand as opposed to maybe hunting off the ground, or do you take every situation, a little bit differently?
Yeah, everything is different. I've hunted all over the Adirondacks, and the Adirondacks, I don't know if most people know this, but the Adirondacks, I believe it's the biggest national park in the United States. So, I mean, there's a lot of land, and it all depends on where I am. If I'm hunting in a tent, like we used to hunt in a tent, it was 3 miles from the nearest road, and I packed a bunch of portable stands in there, and I hung them, and I would move them, randomly throughout the year, every couple of years. And it just kind of depends on what sign I see. I know that in the years that I've hunted in the Midwest, you'll see a lot of the same sign every year in the same places. And where I hunt in the Adirondacks, it's much different. Where you find sign one year, it might not be there the next year. And deer are found in pockets. So you could walk for miles on end with no tracks at all in the snow. You could go over a ridge, and then there's tracks all over the place. So really all you have to do is find those pockets. And I've killed in the Adirondacks, most of the deer I've killed have been on the ground. I actually sit on the ground.
Okay, very nice. So it's safe to say that a major philosophy behind your hunting strategy is to remain mobile.
Oh yeah, what I do pretty much every day, what I do is, since we have so much land and so few people and so few deer, I'll go in the morning, I'll make sure I'm going to wherever I'm going, so I'm there before daylight. I'll sit until, say, 11 or 12, and then I'll either walk the rest of the day, and what I mean by walking is I'll still hunt. And you have to remember that we're hunting with guns up here. It would be senseless pretty much to hunt in the Adirondacks with a bow because our bow season is only 2 weeks long. So if I can hunt with a firearm, I'm going to hunt with a firearm. And what I'll do is I'll walk, and if I find another place that I want to sit, I'll sit there until dark. And in the evening, I always try to make sure I'm within a reasonable distance of the road because I don't want to walk out and beat through brush in the dark. Because unlike the Midwest, there's really not a lot of trails you can follow, and you're aimlessly wandering through the woods. It's essential to be a good woodsman in order to hunt in the big mountains.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I've done, some of that style of hunting myself in the past, and like you said, I mean, you don't want to be, a mile back in the woods at dark. Things certainly look different when you don't have a road, anywhere near you.
Yeah, it's really hard. Most people don't realize too that every few years someone gets lost in the Adirondacks while they're hunting, and they usually end up dead. It's happened a number of times just in my hunting career that I can remember. And the last one that I can remember, the guy was actually a very short distance from the road, and he stopped there in the night. He must have tried to get warm or something, and then he died from hypothermia. So you definitely have to respect the woods, but you can't be afraid of them either.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point there. Now, Todd, my next question for you is I wanted to have you talk about if you have any type of strategic things that you do during the summer months to prepare for hunting season.
Yeah, actually I do. I don't know if you would really call it preparing for hunting season, but I shoot archery pretty much all year round. But I do a lot of 3D shooting in the summer, just because I do a lot of hunting out of state with my bow, whether it be Colorado or across the Midwest whitetail hunting. So I just want to make sure that when the moment comes, I can make the best shot that I can make. So I do a lot of time shooting, and I do a fair amount of reading too to see if I can pick up new things that I might not have known.
Okay, very nice. So it's safe to say that you're not doing much in the woods to prepare for hunting season. Is that correct?
Oh, yep, that is correct. Definitely not in the summer.
Okay, very good. And my next question for you was I wanted to have you, if you could give us an overview or a high-level look at your specific hunting strategy for early season, those first few weeks of the season.
Yeah, actually, I just finished writing a chapter in the new book that's not done on hunting in the early season. And what I do is I go in the woods, and no matter where I am, whether I'm in the Midwest or in the mountains, wherever I am, if it's early season, I'll walk as much as I can. I'll waste a day or two walking, and I'll try to find where there's a cluster of rubs. If I can find a cluster of rubs as well as a place that the deer are feeding, I'll set up right there, because I know that the deer that's making the rubs isn't too far away, because that time of year they tend not to travel too far. And then I have the best of both worlds. I know that a buck is there, and I know the deer are feeding there. So I'll just set up there, and I'll try to find a number of places that are like that, so I can kind of move around a little bit.
Okay. Now, a couple questions that that come in off that, Todd, that I'd have for you is, are you putting like are you looking at like the surrounding cover that, like, say you find a cluster of rubs, would you give a higher priority to a cluster of rubs that's found along, a real, dense, thick swamp, as opposed to a more open hardwood area? Or what's your thoughts on that?
No, it all depends on what you have for food around there, because a lot of those rubs will show up in that open hardwood area. But the reason they're there is because deer are feeding in either beech nuts or, acorns, or they're browsing in there. So I'll still set up right in that general area, because the deer are, they're probably filtering through there. And then down near the swamp or whatever, that might be an area where they're going to and from someplace, or they might be finding cover in the swamp. So, as you said, each thing's a little bit different, and you have to weigh it as you go and make your decisions when you find those types of areas.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, when you find these rubs, are you setting up tree stands, or are you hunting off the ground most often?
Usually in the early season, I'll sit in a tree stand, just because it's so thick that I kind of like to be above all the cover. And if I'm hunting with a firearm, I don't really care if I'm sitting on the ground, and I'll just find a big tree to sit on. It all depends on where I am and like how far I can see in the area that I found all the rubs. Okay. I know I'm probably not helping out a whole lot, but you'd have to almost walk with me so you could see what I did, because every instance has its own, actions and reactions.
Yeah, no, this is all, great information. Now, Todd, what I wanted to get your opinions on. Now, you mentioned finding these rubs. Now, what if you find a cluster of scrapes? What do you personally give more attention to, rubs or scrapes?
Early in the season, I won't pay any attention to any scrape that I see. And the reason being is, usually that time of year, the deer they're kind of just starting to feel their testosterone. Excuse me. And as they're making scrapes, sometimes I don't really think they're just going through the woods making a scrape because they're feeling rambunctious. And if I can find one that's it's a primary scrape that's been used year after year, I might set up on it. But I'll definitely, early season, I'll sit over the rubs over any scrapes that I find.
Okay, very nice. Now, Todd, could you also talk about how your tactics might change going into the pre-rut and then into the rut itself?
Yeah, pre-rut, I'll try to find really well-worked primary scrapes with licking branches in them, especially if they've been there year after year. Just for an example, like I run a trail camera on this one scrape up in an area that we've hunted for 20 years. And on that scrape every year, I'll get between 10 and 15 different bucks. And this is in an area where you're lucky if you see one buck in a hunting season. So my philosophy on that is just try to be there at the right time. So if I can find something like that in the pre-rut, I'll sit on it and just hope something goes by me. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Especially like when I hunted in the Adirondacks for years, and I told everybody, I'll never leave the Adirondacks, I'll never leave the Adirondacks. But then when I started going to the Midwest, I did the same thing out there. I went early so I wouldn't miss the rut in the Adirondacks. So I went the week of Halloween, and when I was out there, weren't too many people in the woods, and I found a lot of those really big primary scrapes. So I decided, well, I'll use the same game plan here as what I do at home. And when I did that, the same exact thing happened, except for out there, instead of getting all the pictures, I was actually seeing the deer. And I was able to shoot some really good deer doing that. And it worked out really well. And another secret with that, which I learned along the way just from my experiences in the woods, is if you find one of those scrapes and it's about the time of year that the leaves are falling and it's really starting to feel like hunting season, and you're doing something, you're kind of not paying much attention, and then it starts raining, make sure you're on that scrape when the rain stops. Because I've seen a number of times where the deer, especially the owner of that scrape, the one who he's the boss in the area, he'll come to that scrape as soon as the rain stops to refreshen it. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. So I definitely try to do that. And then as the rut moves on, what I really do is I just try to find places where does are hanging out. And whether it be, if I find where a bunch of leaves are turned over where they're feeding, I'll just hunt in there, and I'll actually hunt does, hoping that a buck will come in there and check them out. And usually, like up north, like I said, you'll find the deer in pockets. If you can find a pocket where deer are working, if you sit there long enough, you'll have a good buck go by you. It's just a matter of being patient.
Okay, very nice. Now, Todd, I wanted to back you up just a little bit, and I had a question that I wanted to ask you about the primary scrape hunting. Now, what's your thought process as far as whether you're going to hunt that scrape in the morning or in the afternoon? Any particular time of day that you think's best to hunt those primary scrapes?
Yeah, for years I would have told you that I wanted to hunt it in the morning, because I'm a morning person. I'd much rather be in the woods in the morning. And so I would tell you hunt in the morning, but I have notes going back 35 years, and I can tell you that it doesn't matter whether it's morning or evening. It's pretty much 50% when I've killed deer. I killed 50% of them there in the morning and 50% in the evening. So if I'm familiar with an area, I'll look back at all my notes and I'll say, okay, when am I having the most activity here? Usually a place will have more activity in either the evening or the morning. Some places have equal activity, which is obviously a good place to sit all day. But if I'm seeing a lot more deer there in the morning, I'll be there in the morning. If I'm seeing a lot more deer someplace else in the evening, I'll be there in the evening. And I don't ever like put myself in a position where I have to be someplace. Like, I don't change as I go.
Okay, so you're essentially hunting each location maybe in the morning or in the afternoon based off, what you've observed in that area in the past, as far as time of day movement, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And if I'm guessing, I'll sit there both morning and evening, and I'll just see, okay, I saw a deer here in the morning, I didn't see anything in the evening, and then I'll just sit there a couple times, like throughout the year, or if I'm someplace just for a week, I'll give it like a day, like I'll sit there in the morning, and then maybe I'll come back another morning. But for the most part, if the sign's there, I'll wait until I see when they're going through there.
Okay, very nice. Now, Todd, I had another question I wanted to ask you. During this pre-rut and rut phase, what's your philosophy behind like hunting travel corridors or pinch points?
Yeah, that's. I just wrote a chapter about this. No matter where you're hunting, it doesn't matter whether you're here in northern New York or you're someplace in Kansas. What I try to do is I look at things and I try to find some place, like, I compare everything to a human being. So say I'm going to come visit you and you live on the other side of the river. In order for me to get to your house, the easiest way to get there is to go across the bridge. So I look for places in the woods that I like to refer to as bridges, and it's a place that links two places together. In that area that we used to hunt for, I don't know, I hunted it for 20 years. I had a really good spot there, and what it was is a finger came down off a mountain, and a beaver pond was right on the side of the mountain. So there's no way a deer was going to go out through that beaver pond unless it absolutely had to. And the finger came down the mountain, and then directly below me was a swamp that was almost impenetrable. So I knew that they really wouldn't go in there because deer are usually going to take the straightest travel route. So this was the bridge. I was right directly in between those two places, and I saw some phenomenal deer in there, and I killed some really good deer. So what I do is I just try to find places where you can narrow them down so your chances are the best that they're going to go through there instead of just sitting in the middle of the wide open woods.
Okay, very nice. Now, Todd, I also wanted to have you, if you could break down for us a little bit more in detail. I know you mentioned before about still hunting. If you could kind of run us through, what your thought process is when you're out there doing a still hunt.
Yeah, everybody does still hunting differently, and everybody has their own method. Like the way I still hunt isn't the same way that my father does it. It isn't the same way that my friends do it. So you have to have your own method. So what I do, the problem with me, the reason I like to sit is, it sounds really weird, but I get impatient walking. And what I mean by impatient is sometimes I just start tramping through the woods and I lose my focus. So you really want to make sure that you don't lose your focus. Like as I'm walking, I learned this from my buddy Randy Flannery, and he told me walk like a deer. So what he means is just walk like a deer. If you hear a deer coming to you in your stand, it usually has a unique sound, and it's like kind of, they'll shuffle through the leaves like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they'll stop. And deer usually don't just tramp through the woods. So that's kind of what I do. I try to sound like a deer, and I always look for horizontal objects when I'm walking, because deer are always horizontal. Like whether it's their back, like the tops of their ears, their head. So I look for horizontal objects, and I look for things that look a little bit out of place. A lot of people have a really hard time seeing deer, and I guess I'm pretty lucky that I see deer well. And that's probably even more unlikely because we have so few deer. Or then again, it might be because we have so few deer that we have to work so hard to see them. So when I do this, I make sure that I don't walk the same route every time that I walk, because that's another habit that people get into. People will walk the same way every time they walk, and eventually the deer get used to it. It's just like going back and sitting in the same place. Every time you go in there and you climb up the tree and you sit there. You might have killed a deer there 10 years ago, and you think that you can still go back there and kill a deer today. If I killed a deer last year, I'll go back in that area and I'll look to see if the sign's there. If there's no sign, I'm not going back. And too many people get in the habit of going back someplace because they shot a deer there. And that's probably one of the biggest things I would tell people not to do. Look for the sign, not for the past where you shot a deer.
Yeah, that's a great tip, and I know it's one that I fell victim to too many times before myself. Just getting caught in that rut,
It's people do it out of habit. They're like, I killed a deer here. I might be able to kill another deer here, and it's they don't want to go someplace else because they're unsure. They've never sat there and they're like, I killed a deer here, so I'll stay here instead of going someplace else because it's new. Yet that new spot could be where you kill your next deer. So you always have to look at the positive on the other side.
Very well said. I couldn't agree more. Now, Todd, I also wanted to have you, if you could touch on for us a little bit on what your late season hunting strategies are.
Late season all depends on the weather, because the weather is so drastically different from year to year here. Some years we might have waist deep snow, and other years it might be 60 degrees. It all depends on the weather. And what I do is I try to find areas where they're feeding. If we have a lot of snow, I'll try to find where they pod around in the snow and they're trying to feed, whether it be on ferns, browse, or if there's nuts there, beech nuts. And I'll just try to find where they've torn the area up. If I find that, I'll sit there in the late season because I know they're coming back there. But I won't, it's not a time of year that I'll just go sit on a runway, because usually those runways, I would sit on them during the rut because there's a lot of activity and bucks might be cruising up and down them to get to where they're going. They might be chasing does, stuff like that. But I would much rather sit in an area where I find where the snow is turned over, the leaves are turned over, and I think that probably increases my odds a little bit.
Okay. Now, late season, are you doing more stand hunting? Or are you doing more still hunting and being mobile?
It all depends on how cold it is. But yeah, later in the season, it all depends. Like this past late season, I did a lot of walking. I like to walk if there's fresh snow, but it gets really frustrating when you can see all the tracks in the woods and you can't find a deer, because then you know the deer are in there and you can't find them. So I'll walk quite a bit because deer, of course, stand out more on snow. So you don't have to be quite as quiet to sneak up on them because you can see them at further distances. And I also like to sit then, but I don't do one versus the other, on a more regular basis. I just do the same thing pretty much the whole season. I'll sit a little bit, walk a little bit, sit a little bit, walk a little bit.
Okay, very good. Now, Todd, I had kind of an overall or kind of wide scale question for you. Now, when you're looking at a property to hunt, are you basing are you going in there and just putting boots to the ground and trying to visually spot this sign and find these hunting locations that way, or are you doing any kind of remote scouting through aerial images on the computer and stuff like that?
Yeah, what I do for back here is I find an area that looks fairly remote to me, that has, I guess, geographical boundaries, like things that are boundaries, whether it's a road or a mountain or a river, and I'll try to hunt those areas, because if I have somebody new with me, it gives them like a type of security so that they're not afraid of getting lost. And when I go into those areas, I'll just beat the ground and I'll go all through it. I'll walk every place I can walk, just looking for signs. And if I'm hunting a new place, I always look for big rubs. If I find big rubs in there, I know there are big deer in there. And if I don't find big rubs, it doesn't mean that I won't go back there. But the likelihood of me going back there when I see something like that is much greater than someplace else. And then in the Midwest, I'll look at aerial photos, stuff like that, but I won't base my hunting on it. I have a really good friend of mine who goes with me, and he always looks at the aerial photos and maps out places he's going to go. And then he goes there and he checks those places out, and that works really well for him. I'll look at places on a map, but if I get walking and I find something that looks better, I'll go wherever the land takes me. So I don't get into a habit of being forced to something I circled on a map, going to someplace I circled on a map. I more let the sign talk to me, and then whatever it tells me, I listen to it, and then that's what I do.
Okay, so you might use an aerial map or an aerial image to kind of get you into the ballpark, but then once you're there, you're letting your on-the-ground observations kind of dictate what's going to happen next.
Yeah, exactly. Like a couple years ago, I was hunting in Kansas, and I saw where a finger of timber went across this cornfield, and it was just a narrow strip of timber. And obviously deer are going to go through that strip of timber. And on an aerial photograph, anybody that looked at it who's familiar with Midwest hunting would say that's a gold mine right there. But when I got there, the sign told me it really wasn't, so I didn't waste any time there. And I went to the next hedgerow over, which didn't look quite as good as the one on the aerial photo. And that hedgerow there was much better, but most people might have overlooked it just because they would have thought they had to be in that one spot. So I'll look at things, but I don't make myself go there.
Okay, very nice. Now, Todd, I put a note out on Facebook, and letting everybody know that I'd be talking to you this evening. And I had a couple of questions come in from listeners who had some questions for you. So I wanted to ask you those now.
Sure.
The first question that came in was from John Cochran, and his question is, he wants to know what are the top 3 frustrating factors you face in hunting, and he also wanted to know what are the top 3 advantages to your hunting strategy.
Whew. Gee, John, that's tough. Top 3, I could probably give you 10. But I'll start with 3. And the first one is the way that I hunt, whether it be here in New York or in the Midwest or in Colorado, my number 1 frustration is when I see people. And if I park on a road someplace and there are cars all over the place, I just think in my head, oh, do I really want to go in this piece of woods? And I used to let that really bother me. Like, it got under my skin. Then as years went by, I decided, people aren't so bad. I said, maybe they'll move a deer to me, or maybe I'll meet them in the woods and, I'll have a good conversation. I'll learn something. Maybe they've hunted there a lot longer than me. But the amazing thing is, when I used to let it bother me, and then I'd go in the woods hunting, very rarely, even if I see 10 cars on the side of the road, which I have in the past, very rarely do I ever see another person. And I think that's good. Sometimes people have an idea, oh, there's too many people in there, I can't go in there, but the woods are pretty big. If you go in the woods and you spread out a little bit, the chances of seeing somebody else are probably pretty slim. So that's probably my top frustration. And one of the other ones is working really hard. Like where I hunt, I might walk 3 miles in the dark in the morning with no real defined trail with a flashlight. And it takes a lot to do this day after day after day when you don't see any deer. If you see 10 deer to 15 deer in a season in the Adirondacks, then you had a good season. And if you see one buck to shoot at, and it doesn't even matter how big the buck is, say it's a spike horn 4-pointer, if you see one buck in a season to shoot at, you're probably well above average compared to what most other hunters in the big woods have seen. So one of the things that really bothers me is, and frustrates the heck out of me, is you do all that work and then you might get one opportunity and then you blow your opportunity. It might be you could jump a buck out of his bed when you're still hunting and he takes off and you don't get a shot, or you get a shot and you miss. It could be anything like that, but I work really, really hard, and it can become extremely frustrating. And then probably the third thing I would think is whenever I hunt, I try to narrow it down so I know that a big buck is in the area, and I try to hunt that deer. And before I had trail cameras, I didn't know what that deer was, so I just tried to hunt him. And the most frustrating thing is knowing he's there and never catching up with him. I could be there one day and there's sign in there from a couple days ago. I sit there, I get up, I still hunt, and then I come back through that same area on my way out at night, and then he had went through there. He might have opened up a new scrape or made a rub, and it's extremely frustrating when that happens. Some days I'd like to pull my hair out, but in the end, it's probably a little bit better when it all works out, because it's really rewarding. Then what did you want to know? The top 3 advantages of hunting public land? Is that what it was?
Yeah. Well, he wanted to know the top 3 advantages to your hunting style.
probably the number one thing would be the way that I hunt. I'm never locked into going to one place. I hear all these people talk about, I have this farm to hunt, or I leased this property, and then their whole season revolves around that one place. Whether it's, they might go in the Midwest, say they lease a farm in Ohio, they lease a farm in Missouri, Illinois. They're locked into that place, and then they think that they have to hunt there nonstop. By hunting all the public land that I hunt, I'm never locked into a place. If I go someplace and there are too many people there for me, I'll go someplace else. And I don't have to worry about neighbors. Like the neighbors aren't shooting all the deer. I mean, you might have to worry a little bit about people shooting, deer that you passed in public land, but it is public land. So that's probably the top thing that I like. And one of the other things I like about going on public land is I can wander all over the place on most pieces of the ground, and I don't have to worry about crossing boundaries, going on private land. I don't have to worry about tracking a deer and having him go across the fence or across the field that I don't have permission to be on. And another thing too that I like is when I'm doing all that walking, I can find sign that interests me. Sometimes if you're leasing a farm, it might be dead on that farm for the year. Let's say like EHD ran through there and it killed all your deer, and then you leased it for the year. Then you're locked into there, and a lot of people think, oh, I spent all the money, I still have to hunt there. This way, if I go to Missouri where the EHD has been bad the last couple of years, I can go out there, and if the deer just aren't there, I can just pick up and go someplace else. So it's really good to have that available to you. And another thing, too, is I've noticed, and this bothers me a lot when I hear people talk about, I always hear those people say, oh, I'm going to wait for the perfect day to go into my stand, and I'm not going to hunt it. That's the only day I'm going to hunt it this year. The wind has to be right. I'm not going to ruin it. I'm going to save it till the rut or whatever. And I think in some ways that's probably bad, because on public land, the deer are used to human activity. There's a lot of humans roaming around usually, and so the deer feel more comfortable around humans. And a lot of the private land, I've hunted a lot of private land, and sometimes it's like a fine line. You can have not enough activity so that when you're in there, any type of intrusion, the deer will be off guard, like it'll catch them off guard, and then they'll become nocturnal or they'll do something else, and it just makes them very uneasy. And I just think it's better to be in places where there's a lot of human activity, and the more human activity there is, other people will move deer. So if you're in an area where it's basically an escape route or on the edge of a bedding ground, something like that, you could have people move deer past you, and then they might help you kill the biggest buck of your life. So that's probably the top three things that I really like about it, that offer what I think is an advantage to me.
Awesome. Definitely some great insights there, Todd. And I had one more question that I wanted to ask you, and this question came in from William Hauer, and his question is, he wants to know if your tactics could also work on smaller tracts of public land, say 1,000 to 2,000 acres.
William, that could work really well. The secret is finding the right 1,000 to 2,000 acre piece of land. 2,000 acres is a lot of land. Most people don't realize how much land that really is, but just think about it. If you have friends that lease a farm, ask them how many acres they have to hunt, and most of them probably won't have any place more than 300 acres, I would guess. I mean, that's just a guess, but you're talking about 2,000 acres. So my suggestion to you would be to go in there and cover every single bit of that land that you can, and find the best sign you can, and try to make sure that the piece of land that you're hunting has as few people as possible. When I'm hunting, I don't mind people being there, but I still try to find places with less people. And another thing that people do when they're hunting public land, they might go on the internet and do some searching around and stuff. All of the places that come up usually are places that people hunt a lot. So try to find places that don't, if you're interested in someplace, just Google it, and you'll see if people hunt it, because you'll have all sorts of responses come up. If you Google it and nothing comes up, then you know it probably doesn't get hunted, which means it could mean one of two things. It means it's not any good, or two, people have overlooked it, and it might just be what you want. And I had that happen before. I hunted an area that I looked at it and I'm like, oh, it looks pretty good, and the acreage wasn't that big. And the more I looked at it, I'm like, man, that could be good, but it could be really bad. So I took a chance. I drove 20 hours, and when we got there, it was probably the best hunting that I've ever experienced in my life. So those tactics can definitely work.
Awesome. Yeah, great tips there, Todd. And, we've all heard the old adage, I'd rather have the right 80 acres than the wrong 800.
Yeah, there you go. The other thing that I forgot to mention, too, is no matter what you read online about hunting public land, everybody always says, go as far as you can, go as far as you can in the woods. And let me tell you, I've been as far as you can go in the woods, and that is not necessarily true. And I might be the first person to tell you that, but I've killed two of the biggest bucks I've ever killed in the Midwest within sight of the road. I could see cars going by. If you're going to hunt next to the road, just find a place that nobody else is hunting. And they're definitely out there. It's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time and avoiding people. So don't always think you have to go as far as possible in the woods. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, you just have to find where the deer are.
Very well said. All right, Todd, I appreciate you taking the time to answer those questions for us.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And then, if anybody has any questions afterwards, they can feel free to get a hold of me, and I'd be more than happy to help them out if I can. I don't necessarily know that I have all that much more knowledge than anybody else. It's just I've spent a lot of time doing it, and I've been lucky enough to be fairly successful.
Yeah, you certainly have been successful, Todd. And like I said, I wanted to have you on the show tonight to to have you share your knowledge with the listeners. Now, for anybody listening tonight, Todd, where can they go to learn more about the books and the articles that you've written?
All right, they might need a pad of paper to write this down, because I have a lot of places you can go. You can go to my main website, which is just my name, toddmead.com. And on there I have a lot of pictures of past hunts, including Colorado, stuff like that. I keep a hunting journal on there, like it's been on there the last few years, but recently I turned it into a kind of like a public hunting type thing, and I designed it to promote my book, and that is under the hunting journal tab on the website. And then you can, if you want to look at some other stuff like actual books from the area that I hunt, you can go into another website that I designed. It's called adktrailcam.com, which is also a Facebook page. And on the website, I have all Adirondack trail cam pictures on there. And on the Facebook page, I have there's a little bit of everything on there. It's some Adirondack stuff, some other stuff. And then you can find me on, I have another Facebook page. It's called Backcountry Bucks, which is the title of my second book. And I usually share a lot of Adirondack pictures, stuff like that on there. In the last few years, I actually started taking some video, and let me tell you, I'm definitely not a videographer, but I'm taking videos, and I'm a part of Adirondack Bowhunters, and Adam Velastro is trying to, I guess you'd call it, be a surgeon with my pretty bad video, and he's going to try to make a video out of some of the stuff that I have, and I have some pretty unique stuff. But I guess that's, after you see that, you might see why I stick to writing. So, I mean, definitely go check out Adirondack Bowhunters, too.
Okay, and one note is for everybody listening, I'm going to be leaving links to all of these avenues in the show notes. So if you weren't able to write something down there, don't worry. You can just breeze through the show notes and find all those links. And again, Todd, I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us all your knowledge about hunting.
Thanks a lot for having me, Chad. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was all my pleasure. And I'll have to keep in touch with you and see how your 2015 season goes.
Sounds good. Good luck to everybody.
Okay, take care, Todd.
Okay, see you later.
Yep, bye. All right, everyone. Well, there you have it. A look back at my recent interview with Todd Mead. Todd is a very accomplished state land hunter, and I hope that everybody picked up a thing or two from that interview. I know I sure did, that I'm going to be using in my own hunting strategies from here on out. So I hope everybody enjoyed that interview. And I've only got one last reminder for everybody. If you enjoy what we're doing here at the show, I would really appreciate it if you could jump on over to iTunes, leave us a quick review. It's not only a great way for us to get the podcast to more people so we can help more people out, but it's also going to be a great way for me to continue to get great guests like Todd Mead here on the show. And so everybody knows, I'm going to be leaving a bunch of links in the show notes here on today's show where you can learn more about Todd Mead and the books he has written in his articles so that you can learn even more information about his hunting strategies and his hunting tactics. And as always, I want to thank everybody who took the time to tune into this week's show. I'm going to see you next weekend right here on an all-new episode of the TradCast.